What if the real reason you keep failing has nothing to do with your discipline, your intelligence, or your willpower, but everything to do with how you're trying to change? Think about it. How many times have you promised yourself that this time would be different? That you would wake up earlier, work harder, stay focused, become better? And for a few days, maybe even a few weeks, you did. You felt strong, in control, unstoppable, but then something shifted, the energy dropped, the effort felt heavy. And slowly, almost silently, you went back to where you started. And that cycle keeps repeating, not because you are weak, but because your brain is protecting you. Your mind is wired for survival, not transformation. It resists sudden change because it sees it as a threat. Every time you try to force a massive shift, your brain pushes back. It creates doubt. It creates resistance. It drains your energy until you give up. And then you blame yourself, thinking you lack something: discipline, motivation, strength. But the truth is simpler and more powerful. You've been trying to change too much, too fast. That's where everything begins to change. When you stop chasing big, dramatic transformations and start focusing on something almost invisible. Something so small that your brain doesn't even resist it. One step, just one. This is the principle that quietly reshapes lives. Improve a little every single day. No pressure, no extremes. No unrealistic expectations, just small, consistent action. It sounds simple, almost too simple. That's why most people ignore it. But here's what they don't understand. Small actions are not weak. They are strategic. When you take one small action, your brain accepts it. There's no fear, no resistance. And when you repeat that action again and again, something deeper begins to happen. You start building evidence, proof that you follow through, proof that you are consistent, proof that you are in control, and that proof rewires how you see yourself. Because at the core of everything, your identity drives your behavior. You don't act based on what you want. You act based on who you believe you are. If you believe you are inconsistent, you will hesitate. If you believe you always quit, you will eventually stop. But when you start showing up daily, even in the smallest way, that belief begins to crack. You start to see yourself differently, not as someone who talks, but as someone who does. And that shift is powerful, because once your identity changes, your actions follow naturally. You don't have to force yourself anymore. You don't have to rely on motivation. You move because it's who you are becoming. This is how real transformation happens, quietly, slowly, but permanently. While others chase intensity and burn out, you build momentum. While others wait for the perfect moment, you take the smallest step. And over time, those steps stack. They grow, they compound into something unstoppable. One push-up becomes 10. One page becomes a habit. One decision becomes a new standard. And one day you look back and realize something incredible. You didn't just change your habits, you changed your mind. And once your mind changes, your life has no choice but to follow. And once your mind begins to shift like that, something deeper starts to surface, a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Why am I even doing this? Not what you're doing, not how you're doing it, but why? Because without a reason, even the strongest habits feel empty. Even discipline starts to feel like a burden. You can push yourself for a while, but eventually the weight of meaninglessness catches up. You begin to feel lost, even while moving forward. Busy but not fulfilled, active but not alive. That's the hidden struggle no one talks about. You can build habits, you can become consistent, but if your direction is unclear, you will drift. And drifting slowly drains your energy, your focus, and your will to continue. Your mind needs a target, your heart needs a reason. This is where everything becomes sharper, clearer, stronger. Because when you connect your actions to something that actually matters to you, everything changes. Effort no longer feels forced. Discipline no longer feels heavy. You stop asking yourself, do I feel like doing this today? And start saying, this matters too much not to. That shift is powerful. It turns struggle into purpose. But finding that reason requires honesty, not surface-level answers, not what sounds good, not what impresses others. Real honesty. You have to ask yourself what actually excites you. Not for a moment, but deeply. What pulls your attention without force? What gives you energy instead of draining it? That's your signal. That's where your natural drive lives. Then you have to face another question. What are you willing to become great at? Not instantly, not easily, but over time with effort, patience, and focus. Because passion without skill fades. But when passion meets growth, it becomes powerful. And then comes impact. Where do your actions create value beyond yourself? Because meaning expands when it connects to something larger. When what you do matters not just to you, but to others, your motivation deepens. It becomes harder to quit when your actions carry weight. And finally, reality. Can this path sustain you? Can it grow with you? Can it support your life not just emotionally, but practically? Most people never go this deep. They stay distracted. They chase quick rewards. They avoid these questions because they are uncomfortable, because they force you to confront the gap between where you are and where you could be. But that discomfort is where clarity is born. And once you find even a small sense of direction, something inside you stabilizes. Your energy stops scattering. Your focus tightens. Your actions begin to align. You stop doing random things. You start doing meaningful things, and meaning changes everything. Because when your actions have meaning, you don't need constant motivation. You don't need to be pushed. You move because something inside you refuses to stay still. It becomes internal. Quiet, steady. Even on hard days, you continue, not because it's easy, but because it matters. And when your actions are backed by that kind of purpose, consistency becomes natural. Discipline becomes sustainable. Growth becomes inevitable. You are no longer just improving for the sake of improvement. You are building a life that actually feels worth living. And when you begin to build a life that actually feels worth living, a new obstacle appears, one that silently destroys more potential than failure ever could. The need to be perfect, it creeps in quietly. You start raising your standards, which is good. You start wanting better results, which is natural. But then something shifts. You stop moving unless everything feels right. You hesitate. You overthink. You delay action because it's not good enough yet. And without realizing it, you trap yourself. Because perfection is not a standard. It's a delay mechanism. It convinces you that waiting is smart, that holding back is necessary, that if you can't do it flawlessly, you shouldn't do it at all. But that belief slowly kills momentum. You stop showing up, not because you don't care, but because you care too much about how it looks, how it feels, how it turns out. Every action becomes heavy. Every decision becomes stressful, and eventually you do nothing. That's the cost of perfection. It replaces progress with pressure, but real growth doesn't happen in perfect conditions. It happens in messy, uncertain, uncomfortable moments where you act anyway, where you move forward despite not feeling ready, where you accept that your first attempt will be flawed. Because it will be, every skill you admire, every level you want to reach was built on imperfect action repeated over time. No one starts strong. No one begins at their best. They begin uncertain, inconsistent, and flawed. The difference is they didn't stop. They didn't wait to feel perfect. They allowed themselves to be imperfect and kept going. That's where real power is unlocked. When you remove the pressure to be perfect, you free yourself to act. And when you act consistently, even at a low level, something powerful begins to happen. You gain experience, you build confidence, you learn faster, not because you're talented, but because you're moving. Action creates clarity, not thinking, not planning endlessly. Action. Even if it's slow, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it feels awkward, because every imperfect step carries you forward, and over time, those imperfect steps start to refine themselves. Your movements become sharper, your decisions become clearer, your confidence becomes real, not imagined, not forced. Earned, you also begin to change how you see yourself. You stop labeling your flaws as weaknesses that hold you back. You start seeing them as part of the process that shapes you. You stop reacting emotionally to every mistake. You expect it. You accept it, and because of that, you recover faster. That emotional stability is rare. It allows you to stay focused while others quit. It allows you to continue while others doubt themselves. It gives you an edge that has nothing to do with talent and everything to do with mindset. Because while others are waiting for perfect conditions, you are building progress in imperfect ones. And that difference compounds. You move forward while they stay stuck. You grow while they hesitate. You evolve while they overthink. And eventually the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Not because you were better from the start, but because you were willing to continue when things weren't perfect. And that willingness changes everything. It turns effort into momentum. It turns mistakes into lessons. It turns you into someone who doesn't stop. And when you become someone who doesn't stop, you start to notice something uncomfortable. It's not your circumstances holding you back anymore. It's you. Your thoughts, your reactions, your impulses. Because no matter how strong your habits are, no matter how clear your purpose feels, there will be moments when you don't feel like continuing. Moments when your mind tries to pull you back into comfort, into distraction, into old patterns that feel familiar and safe. And in those moments, everything is decided, not by your goals, not by your plans, but by your ability to control yourself. This is where most people lose. They rely on how they feel, and feelings are unstable. One day you feel focused, the next day you feel tired. One day you feel driven, the next day you feel distracted. If your actions depend on your emotions, your progress will always be inconsistent. That inconsistency is what keeps you stuck. Because every time you choose comfort over action, you reinforce a pattern. You teach your mind that resistance wins. That discomfort is something to avoid. And slowly that pattern becomes your default until you break it. And breaking it requires something deeper than motivation. It requires control, the kind of control that doesn't negotiate. The kind of control that doesn't ask, do I feel like it today? But instead says, this is what I do. That shift is powerful. Because when you act based on decisions instead of emotions, you remove uncertainty. You create stability. You build a standard that doesn't change depending on your mood. And standards shape identity. When you set a rule and follow it every time, you send a clear message to your mind. You are in charge, not your impulses, not your distractions, not your temporary feelings. But this level of control doesn't happen automatically. It requires awareness. You have to see yourself clearly. You have to notice your patterns. The moments you hesitate, the excuses you repeat, the ways you escape discomfort. Because if you don't see it, you can't change it. Most people avoid this. They stay busy. They distract themselves. They fill their time so they don't have to confront the truth. But truth is where power begins. When you sit with yourself and honestly observe your behavior, something shifts. You stop lying to yourself. You stop pretending. You see exactly where you are without filters, and that clarity gives you control. Because now, when the moment comes, the moment where you want to quit, delay, or avoid, you recognize it, you catch it. And instead of following it, you override it. You act anyway. That action, especially when it's hard, builds something rare. Mental strength. Not the loud kind, not the kind that needs validation. But the quiet, unshakable kind that shows up when it matters most. The kind that keeps going when no one is watching. The kind that doesn't break under pressure. And every time you choose action over comfort, you reinforce that strength. You deepen it. You make it part of who you are. Until one day, discipline is no longer something you force. It becomes automatic. You don't argue with yourself anymore. You don't debate. You don't delay. You move with clarity, with control, with intention. And once you reach that level, your life stops being random. It becomes directed. Every action has purpose. Every decision has weight. Every step moves you forward. Because you are no longer controlled by how you feel. You are controlled by who you have chosen to become. And when you become someone who is controlled by who you have chosen to become, everything that once felt scattered begins to align. Your actions are no longer random. Your effort is no longer wasted. Your energy is no longer divided. It all starts working together. The small steps you take daily begin to compound. The direction you've chosen begins to guide those steps. The acceptance of imperfection removes the weight that once slowed you down. And the control you've built keeps you moving even when it's hard. This is where momentum is born, not from intensity, not from sudden bursts of motivation, but from alignment. When your habits, your purpose, your mindset, and your discipline all point in the same direction, something powerful happens. You stop feeling like you're forcing your life forward. You start feeling like you're being pulled by it. That shift is everything, because forcing requires constant energy. It drains you, it exhausts you, but alignment creates flow, it sustains you. It carries you forward even when you feel tired. And that's the difference between people who start and stop and people who keep going. Most people try to fix one piece of their life while ignoring the others. They build habits without purpose. They chase purpose without discipline. They demand perfection without consistency. And when it doesn't work, they feel confused. But confusion disappears when everything connects. When your small actions are guided by a clear reason, they gain meaning. When you allow those actions to be imperfect, you remove resistance. When you apply control to repeat them daily, you build strength. Each piece supports the other. And together they create something that is hard to break. A system, not a temporary phase, not a short burst of motivation, but a structure that holds you up even when you feel low. Because there will be days when you don't feel like continuing, days when your energy drops, days when your focus slips. But when you have a system, those days don't stop you, they don't define you. You still move, maybe slower, maybe with less intensity, but you don't stop. And that consistency, especially on hard days, is what separates real transformation from temporary change. Because anyone can move forward when it feels good. Very few continue when it doesn't. That's where the real shift happens. You stop depending on ideal conditions. You stop waiting for the right mood. You stop needing everything to be perfect. You adapt, you adjust, you continue. And over time, that ability to keep going builds something deeper than success. It builds trust in yourself. You start believing your own words again. When you say you'll do something, you know you will. Not because you feel like it, but because it's part of your system. That kind of trust is powerful. It removes doubt. It strengthens confidence. It creates stability in a world that constantly tries to pull you in different directions. And once you have that, your progress becomes inevitable. Not fast, not easy, but certain, because you are no longer relying on chance. You are operating with alignment. And alignment, once built, is difficult to break. It turns effort into identity. It turns actions into habits. It turns discipline into something natural. And most importantly, it turns you into someone who keeps moving forward, no matter what. And when you become someone who keeps moving forward no matter what, a quiet realization begins to settle inside you. You are no longer the same person who started this journey. The hesitation that once controlled you starts to fade. The excuses that once felt convincing lose their power. The need to constantly search for motivation disappears because you no longer depend on it. You've built something deeper, something stable, something real. At first, the changes were small, almost invisible. A few better decisions, a little more consistency, slightly more control. But over time, those small shifts reshaped how you think, how you act, and how you respond to pressure. And now you don't have to force yourself the way you used to. You don't argue with your mind every morning. You don't waste energy convincing yourself to start. You don't sit in that space between knowing what to do and avoiding it. You just move, because it's no longer a question of effort. It's a matter of identity. This is the point most people never reach. They spend their lives trying to change their actions without ever changing who they believe they are. They try to stay consistent while still seeing themselves as inconsistent. They try to stay disciplined while still identifying with their old habits, and that conflict keeps them stuck. But you've broken that pattern. You've proven to yourself again and again that you are someone who shows up, someone who continues, someone who doesn't collapse the moment things get hard. And that proof rewires everything, because once your identity shifts, your behavior follows naturally. You no longer need constant reminders. You no longer need external pressure. You don't rely on bursts of inspiration. You act because it's who you are. And once you reach that level, something powerful happens. Going back becomes difficult, not impossible, but uncomfortable. Because you've experienced what it feels like to be in control, to have clarity, to move with purpose. And once you feel that, returning to confusion and inconsistency feels wrong. You notice it immediately. The old patterns don't feel normal anymore. The distractions don't satisfy you the same way. The comfort that once pulled you in starts to feel like a trap. And that awareness protects you. It keeps you from falling too far. It pulls you back when you slip. It reminds you of the standard you've set for yourself, not through pressure, but through truth. You've seen what you're capable of, and that changes your expectations. You no longer settle for less, not because you're forcing yourself to be perfect, but because you've experienced better. You know what alignment feels like. You know what discipline feels like. You know what it means to move forward even when it's hard, and that knowledge becomes your anchor. Even on difficult days, when your energy is low and your mind feels heavy, you don't completely stop. You adjust, you slow down if needed, but you don't break. Because stopping completely no longer feels like an option. That's the real transformation. Not becoming perfect, not becoming unstoppable in some unrealistic way, but becoming someone who always returns to the path. Someone who can fall but not stay down. Someone who can struggle but not surrender. And when you reach that point, your future changes. Not because everything becomes easy, but because no matter what happens, you keep going. And a person who keeps going with clarity, with purpose, with control, becomes impossible to defeat. And when you become someone who is impossible to defeat, the final shift is no longer about what you do. It's about what you refuse to become again. Because now you understand something most people never fully realize. Your life is not shaped by one big decision. It is shaped by the standards you accept every single day. And those standards are no longer negotiable. You've seen what happens when you let things slide, when you delay, when you ignore the small actions that once built your strength. You felt how quickly momentum can slow down when discipline is ignored, even slightly. So you stop playing with that line. You stop testing how far you can fall before it hurts again. Instead, you protect what you've built, not with fear but with awareness, because you know this version of you didn't happen by accident. It was created, step by step, decision by decision. Through moments when you didn't feel like continuing, but you did anyway. And that effort has value. You begin to respect your own progress in a way that changes how you act. You don't throw away your discipline for temporary comfort. You don't sacrifice your direction for short-term distraction, because now you see clearly. Every small action either builds you or breaks you. There is no neutral, and that awareness sharpens your choices. You don't need someone to remind you anymore. You don't need pressure from outside. You don't need to wait for the right time. You respond immediately, because hesitation no longer feels harmless. It feels dangerous, not dramatic, but real. You understand that the person you are becoming is shaped in the smallest moments, the quiet decisions, the unseen actions, the times when no one is watching and it would be easy to fall back. But you don't, because you've crossed a line internally. You've experienced control, clarity, and alignment, and once you experience that, your tolerance for chaos drops. Your tolerance for excuses disappears. You no longer entertain the version of yourself that used to quit. Not because you hate that version, but because you've outgrown it. That's the difference. Growth is not about rejecting who you were, it's about refusing to stay there. And now your focus becomes sharper than ever. You don't chase everything. You don't get distracted easily. You don't waste energy on things that don't align with your direction, because you know where you're going. And more importantly, you know who you are becoming. That clarity simplifies everything. Decisions become easier. Actions become faster. Doubt becomes weaker. You stop overthinking. You start executing. And that consistency, over time, creates a life that looks completely different from where you started. Not because you were lucky, not because it was easy, but because you stayed in control long enough for the results to catch up. And now there is only one thing left: to continue, not for a week, not for a month, but as a way of living. To keep improving, even when progress feels slow. To stay connected to your purpose, even when distractions pull at you. To accept imperfection without losing momentum. To maintain control, even when your mind tries to drift. Because this is no longer a phase, this is who you are. And when you fully commit to that identity, without hesitation, without doubt, without compromise, there is no version of your future where you don't succeed.